Glory Anslem grew up in the lap of luxury, the cherished only child of wealthy Nigerian businessman, Mr. Anslem, and his graceful wife, Mrs. Anslem. From the moment she was born, it was clear that Glory was destined for greatness. Her parents spared no expense in ensuring she received the finest education available, both at home and abroad. By the time Glory was 21, she had graduated from one of the most prestigious universities in the UK with a degree in business administration, returning to Nigeria ready to take on the world. But despite all her achievements, there was something missing in her life, something that no amount of education, wealth, or luxury could provide: love. Mr. and Mrs. Anslem were protective parents, though they gave Glory freedom within reason. They wanted the best for her, not just materially, but emotionally. From a young age, they had instilled in her the importance of marrying a man who shared her values, someone who would treat her with respect and care. They had high hopes that she would marry within their social circle, perhaps the son of a business associate or a young man from a well-respected family. But as fate would have it, Glory's heart didn't lead her in the direction her parents had hoped. It was at a charity gala in Abuja that Glory first met Raymond Adewale. He was everything she wasn't used to: unpolished, bold, and exuding a kind of rugged confidence that immediately captured her attention. Raymond wasn't a stranger to wealth, but unlike the refined, educated men in Glory's circle, his wealth came from years of street smarts and business deals that were, at times, less than savory. He was a self-made man, having risen from humble beginnings in a small village outside Lagos to owning several successful real estate ventures in Abuja. His hands were rough, and his demeanor was straightforward, which starkly contrasted with the smooth, polished men Glory had always been surrounded by. At first, their interactions were brief and surface level, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them. Raymond had a magnetic personality, one that seemed to pull Glory in despite her reservations. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years, teasing her about her proper accent and the way she carried herself with the grace of someone who had never known hardship. To him, Glory was a symbol of everything he had fought for, a woman who had never had to struggle but still carried a warmth and kindness that he found irresistible. For Glory, Raymond was a breath of fresh air. She had spent most of her life around men who were predictable, with carefully curated public images and well-rehearsed lines. But Raymond was different. He was raw, unfiltered, and confident in a way that challenged her perceptions of what a man should be. Despite his lack of formal education, he was street-smart and incredibly savvy when it came to business. He had built an empire from the ground up, and that kind of determination and grit was something Glory found deeply attractive. The more they talked, the more Glory realized how much they had in common. Both had experienced the pressure of high expectations, hers from her parents and society, and his from the streets and his own drive to succeed. They both craved something deeper, something that transcended the material wealth and status they had acquired. It wasn't long before their friendship blossomed into something more, and soon, they were inseparable. However, not everyone shared Glory's enthusiasm for the relationship. When Mr. Anslem first heard about Raymond, he was less than pleased. He had hoped that Glory would marry someone with a more conventional background, someone who had the education, refinement, and social standing to match their family status. To him, Raymond represented everything he didn't want for his daughter, an unpolished man whose wealth came from questionable sources and whose education was lacking. "Glory, my dear," her father said one evening as they sat in the garden of their sprawling estate. "I understand that you're in love, but love isn't everything. You need to think about your future, about the kind of man you want by your side for the rest of your life." Glory sighed, knowing where this conversation was headed. "Daddy, Raymond is a good man. He may not have the same background as us, but he's hardworking, successful, and he treats me well." Mr. Anslem shook his head, his expression one of concern. "Success isn't just about money, Glory. It's about character. A man can be rich today and lose everything tomorrow, but if he has good character, he can rebuild. What do you know about this man's character? What do you know about the way he treats people who can't do anything for him? Glory didn't have an answer. She had seen Raymond's softer side, the side that made her feel like the only woman in the world, but she had also seen glimpses of his temper, his impatience with those he considered beneath him. Still, she believed in their love, believed that they could overcome any obstacles as long as they were together. Despite her father's concerns, Glory pushed forward with the relationship. She was determined to prove that their love was strong enough to withstand the doubts and criticisms of others. Raymond, too, was eager to solidify their union, knowing that marrying Glory would elevate his status even further in Abuja's elite circles. After a whirlwind romance, Raymond proposed, and Glory, blinded by love and the fairy tale she had built in her mind, said yes. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was nothing short of extravagant. Mr. and Mrs. Anslem, though still hesitant about the match, spared no expense to give their daughter the wedding of her dreams. Invitations were sent to the who's who of Nigerian society, and the event quickly became the talk of the town. The day of the wedding arrived, and as Glory walked down the aisle in her custom-made gown, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't the nerves that most brides feel on their wedding day, it was something deeper, something that tugged at the edges of her consciousness, warning her that she was making a mistake. But as soon as she locked eyes with Raymond, all her doubts melted away. She loved him, and that was all that mattered. The ceremony was beautiful, with vows exchanged under a canopy of white roses and twinkling lights. As they said their "I do's," the crowd erupted in applause, and for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. Glory was married to the man she loved, and she was ready to start the next chapter of her life. But even as the celebrations continued late into the night, the first cracks in their relationship were beginning to form. The early days of Glory and Raymond's marriage were filled with the kind of happiness that seemed to confirm all of Glory's hopes and dreams. They spent their honeymoon in Paris, dining at the finest restaurants and shopping at the most exclusive boutiques. Raymond, despite his gruff exterior, was surprisingly attentive, showering Glory with gifts and affection. He seemed determined to prove to her that their love was real and that they were meant to be together. For the first few months, Glory was in bliss. She had everything she had ever wanted: a handsome, successful husband, a beautiful home, and the promise of a bright future. They threw lavish parties in their Abuja mansion, entertaining guests from all walks of life. Glory's friends admired her for snagging such a successful man, and Raymond basked in the admiration and envy of others. But as the honeymoon phase began to fade, so did Raymond's patience. The first sign of trouble came when Glory discovered she was pregnant. She had always dreamed of being a mother, and the news filled her with joy. Raymond, however, was less enthusiastic. While he was excited at the prospect of having a child, he also began to withdraw emotionally. He wasn't as attentive as he had been before, often making excuses to stay late at work or go out with friends. Glory tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the stress of impending fatherhood. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The man who had once been so loving and caring was now distant and cold. She began to feel like she was walking on eggshells, unsure of what she had done to cause the shift in his behavior. As her pregnancy progressed, Glory's health became a concern. She experienced complications that required her to undergo frequent checkups and tests. Her doctor eventually informed her that a natural birth might be too risky and recommended a cesarean section. Glory was devastated. She had always imagined giving birth naturally, like her mother had, and the thought of surgery terrified her. When she told Raymond, his reaction was even worse than she had anticipated. He seemed disgusted by the idea of a C-section, as if it were a personal failing on her part. "What do you mean, you can't give birth naturally?" he snapped. Women have been giving birth for centuries without surgery. Why can't you? Glory was stunned. Raymond, it's not like I have a choice. The doctor said it's too risky for me and the baby. I don't care what the doctor said, Raymond replied, his voice dripping with contempt. You're supposed to be my wife, a strong woman. And now you're telling me you can't even give birth like a normal woman. The word stung, cutting deeper than Glory had expected. She had always prided herself on being strong and independent, but now, in Raymond's eyes, she was weak and inadequate. The man who had once adored her was now treating her like a failure. The day of Glory's C-section arrived, and while her parents were there to support her, Raymond was noticeably absent. He had made some excuse about a business meeting that couldn't be rescheduled, leaving Glory to face the surgery alone. The procedure was successful, and Glory gave birth to a healthy baby boy, whom she named Emmanuel. But even the joy of motherhood couldn't erase the pain of Raymond's abandonment. When Raymond finally did visit the hospital, his attitude was cold and indifferent. He barely acknowledged their newborn son, instead focusing on Glory's surgery. I can't believe you had to go through with it, he said, shaking his head in disappointment. You're supposed to be a woman, Glory. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Glory's heart sank. She had hoped that the birth of their son would bring them closer, but instead, it seemed to drive an even bigger wedge between them. She tried to talk to Raymond about it, but he shut her down every time, insisting that she was overreacting. As the months passed, Raymond's neglect and verbal abuse only worsened. He criticized everything about Glory, from the way she dressed to the way she cared for their son. Nothing she did was ever good enough, and she found herself retreating more and more into herself, trying to avoid his wrath. Glory's parents, who had initially been hesitant about the marriage, began to notice the strain in their daughter's relationship. Mrs. Anslem, in particular, grew concerned. She had always been close to Glory, and it pained her to see her once vibrant, confident daughter shrinking under the weight of her husband's cruelty. One evening, while visiting her parents, Glory finally broke down in tears, unable to hold back the pain any longer. She had been holding everything in for so long, unsure of how to explain the years of abuse she had endured. But as the dam broke, she found herself pouring out everything, the neglect, the constant criticism, the feeling of being unloved and unwanted. The moment Glory broke down in her parents' home, years of pent-up frustration and sorrow came pouring out. Her mother, Mrs. Anslem, immediately embraced her, holding her tightly as she sobbed into her shoulder. Mr. Anslem sat quietly, his hands clasped together, his brow furrowed in concern. He had suspected that something was wrong, but hearing the full extent of Glory's suffering brought a wave of guilt over him. Perhaps if they had been more forceful in their opposition to her marriage with Raymond, this pain could have been avoided. After several minutes, Glory wiped her tears and sat up, taking a deep breath. Her mother handed her a glass of water, and she sipped it slowly, trying to calm herself. Glory, Mrs. Anslem said softly, her voice filled with concern. Why didn't you tell us sooner? You don't have to go through this alone. Glory stared at her hands, her fingers trembling slightly. I thought I could handle it. I thought he would change after the baby was born, that things would get better. But, it's only gotten worse. Mr. Anslem finally spoke, his voice deep and serious. I never liked that man, Glory. From the moment I met him, I knew he wasn't right for you. He doesn't deserve you. This abuse you're suffering, it's not normal, and it's not your fault. Glory's chest tightened with emotion. She had been telling herself for years that things would get better, that Raymond's cruelty was somehow her fault, that if she just tried harder, loved him more, things would change. But hearing her father's words, the weight of that false narrative began to lift, and for the first time in a long time, she saw the situation for what it truly was, abuse. Mrs. Anslem squeezed Glory's hand gently. You need to leave him, Glory. We will support you, whatever decision you make. But you cannot stay in a marriage where you are being treated like this. You deserve so much better. Glory's heart ached at the thought of leaving Raymond. Despite everything, she still loved him. She had married him because she believed in their love, and walking away felt like admitting defeat. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the toll the marriage had taken on her mental and physical health. She had lost weight, her hair was thinning from stress, and her once radiant smile was now a distant memory. Her self-worth had been eroded by years of emotional abuse, and she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. For the next few days, Glory stayed at her parents' home, taking time to rest and gather her thoughts. Emmanuel was there too, and her parents doted on their grandson, offering the kind of warmth and affection that had been missing from her life for so long. It was a brief reprieve from the storm that had been raging in her marriage, but it didn't take long for reality to come crashing back in. Raymond called, demanding to know why she hadn't come home. His voice was cold and accusatory, as if Glory were the one at fault for needing space. She hesitated before answering, her heart pounding in her chest. I needed time, Raymond, she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. I needed to think. Think about what? He snapped. What do you have to think about, Glory? You're my wife. You belong here with me, not at your parents' house, hiding away like a child. Glory swallowed the lump in her throat. I'm not hiding. I need a break from all of this. From you. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and when Raymond spoke again, his tone was dark and menacing. You think you can just walk away from me, Glory? You think you can leave and take my son with you? Don't forget who you're married to. I won't let you make me look like a fool. His words sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't the man she had fallen in love with, this was a stranger, someone who saw her as a possession rather than a partner. But she had made up her mind. She couldn't go back to the way things were. I'm not coming back, Raymond, Glory said firmly, her voice shaking slightly. I can't live like this anymore. I deserve more than being treated like I'm less than human. Raymond's silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then, without another word, he hung up, leaving Glory to wonder what would happen next. Over the next few weeks, Raymond's behavior became erratic. He would show up at her parents' house unannounced, demanding to see Glory and their son. At first, Glory tried to be civil, allowing him to visit Emmanuel under supervision. But his temper quickly got the best of him, and he began lashing out at Glory in front of her parents, accusing her of trying to ruin his life. You think you're better than me now? Raymond spat one evening as he stood in the living room of her parents' home. You think because you've got your rich parents backing you up, you can just throw me away like trash? Glory stood her ground, refusing to engage with his insults. I'm not throwing you away, Raymond. I just can't live like this anymore. You don't treat me with respect. You don't love me the way a husband should love his wife. Raymond's face twisted with anger. Respect. Love. You're nothing but a spoiled brat who doesn't know the first thing about being a wife. You think you're some kind of victim, but you're the one who's broken. You couldn't even give birth properly. The words cut through Glory like a knife, and for a moment, she felt the familiar sting of shame rising within her. But then she remembered the strength she had found in her time away from him, the clarity that came from being surrounded by people who truly cared about her. I'm not broken, Raymond, Glory said, her voice steady. But this marriage is. Her parents, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, finally stepped in. Mr. Anslem placed a firm hand on Raymond's shoulder, his voice low and authoritative. It's time for you to leave, Raymond. We won't allow you to continue harassing our daughter in our home. Raymond glared at them, but he knew better than to cause a scene in front of Mr. Anslem. With one last hateful look at Glory, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Glory exhaled a shaky breath, her body trembling from the confrontation. Her mother rushed to her side, wrapping her arms around her in a comforting embrace. "You did the right thing, Glory," she whispered. "You're stronger than you think." For the next few months, Glory focused on healing. She attended therapy sessions, slowly working through the trauma she had experienced during her marriage. It wasn't easy. There were days when she felt like giving up, when the weight of her emotions was too much to bear. But with the support of her family, she began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Her relationship with Emmanuel grew stronger as well. She was determined to be the best mother she could be, providing him with a safe and loving environment. Emmanuel, now a toddler, was her source of joy and hope, a reminder that there was still beauty in her life despite the pain she had endured. Raymond, meanwhile, made several attempts to reconcile, sending flowers, gifts, and handwritten letters apologizing for his behavior. But Glory had made up her mind. She couldn't go back to him, no matter how much he claimed to have changed. She had finally realized her worth, and she refused to settle for anything less than the love and respect she deserved. It wasn't long before Glory filed for divorce, a decision that sent shockwaves through Abuja's elite circles. The media was quick to pick up on the story, and soon, rumors were swirling about the reasons behind the split. Some speculated that Raymond's temper had gotten the best of him, while others whispered about Glory's inability to give birth naturally as the true cause of the divorce. Through it all, Glory remained resolute. She didn't owe anyone an explanation for her choices. She had spent too long living in the shadows of other people's expectations, and now, she was finally living for herself. But just as Glory began to feel like she was reclaiming her life, a new challenge emerged, one that would test her strength and resilience in ways she could never have imagined. Life after the divorce was not as peaceful as Glory had hoped. Raymond's ego had taken a blow, and he was determined to make her suffer for it. He refused to pay child support, and whenever Glory tried to speak with him about their son, he became hostile and aggressive. He even spread rumors about her in social circles, accusing her of being an unfit mother and a manipulative woman who had used him for his money. It wasn't just the rumors that hurt. Raymond's refusal to support Emmanuel financially placed an immense strain on Glory. Although her parents helped as much as they could, Glory felt guilty about relying on them for support. She had always prided herself on being independent, but now she found herself struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Balancing her career, motherhood, and her own emotional healing became an exhausting juggling act. Raymond's attacks weren't just limited to financial sabotage and rumors. One night, Glory returned home to find the locks on her apartment changed and an eviction notice pinned to the door. She had been living in a property owned by Raymond's company, and although the lease was still valid, he had pulled some strings to have her thrown out. It was a deliberate act of cruelty, designed to make her life as difficult as possible. Glory stood outside the door, holding Emmanuel in her arms as tears welled up in her eyes. She had nowhere to go. Her parents' house was miles away, and she didn't want to burden them again. For the first time in a long while, she felt completely helpless. But then, as if fate had intervened, her phone rang. It was a friend from work, Ada, who had heard about Glory's situation and offered her a place to stay for the night. Ada had been one of the few people who had supported Glory throughout her marriage and divorce, always offering a listening ear and words of encouragement. "Come over, Glory," Ada said gently over the phone. "You and Emmanuel can stay with me for as long as you need." The kindness in Ada's voice brought fresh tears to Glory's eyes. It was a reminder that even in her darkest moments, there were still people who cared about her. She thanked Ada profusely and quickly made her way to her friend's apartment. Over the next few weeks, Glory found herself relying more and more on Ada for emotional support. Ada was a single mother as well, and she understood the struggles that Glory was facing. She didn't judge Glory for her choices or try to offer unsolicited advice. She simply listened and provided comfort when it was needed. In Ada's presence, Glory felt a sense of relief that she hadn't felt in a long time. Ada became more than just a friend, she was a lifeline, a reminder that Glory wasn't alone in her struggles. Together, they navigated the challenges of single motherhood, offering each other encouragement and understanding. But just as Glory began to find her footing again, tragedy struck. One afternoon, while Glory was picking Emmanuel up from daycare, she received a frantic call from Ada's neighbor. Ada had collapsed at home and had been rushed to the hospital. Glory's heart raced as she hurried to the hospital, her mind spinning with worry. When she arrived, she was met with devastating news. Ada had suffered a brain aneurysm and was in critical condition. The doctors were doing everything they could, but the prognosis was grim. For the next 24 hours, Glory stayed by Ada's side, praying for a miracle. But despite the doctors' efforts, Ada's condition worsened, and by the next morning, she had passed away. The loss of her friend was a devastating blow. Ada had been the one person who had stood by Glory through everything, offering her unwavering support and friendship. Now, she was gone, leaving Glory to navigate the world of single motherhood alone once again. After Ada's funeral, Glory fell into a deep depression. The weight of everything, her failed marriage, the struggles of single motherhood, the financial strain, and now the loss of her closest friend, became too much to bear. She felt like she was drowning in grief, unable to find a way out. Days turned into weeks, and Glory found herself sinking deeper and deeper into despair. She barely had the energy to care for Emmanuel, let alone herself. She stopped going to work, stopped answering her phone, and shut herself off from the world. It was during one of these dark moments that Glory's parents intervened. Concerned for their daughter's well-being, they took her back into their home, where they could watch over her and help care for Emmanuel. For weeks, Glory lay in bed, too numb to feel anything. She had hit rock bottom, and she didn't know how to climb back up. But slowly, with the love and support of her parents, she began to heal. Her father, in particular, played a crucial role in her recovery. He would sit by her bedside, telling her stories of his own struggles and reminding her that she was stronger than she thought. His quiet strength and unwavering belief in her gave Glory the motivation she needed to keep going. Gradually, Glory began to rebuild her life. She found a new job, one that allowed her to balance her responsibilities as a mother with her career. She also started attending therapy again, determined to walk through the trauma of her past and reclaim her sense of self-worth. But perhaps the most important step in her healing journey was learning to forgive herself. For so long, Glory had blamed herself for everything that had gone wrong in her life, her failed marriage, her struggles as a mother, the loss of her friend. But through therapy, she learned that it wasn't her fault. She had done the best she could in an impossible situation, and that was enough. In time, Glory found a sense of peace that she hadn't known in years. She was still a single mother, still navigating the challenges of life, but now, she faced those challenges with a newfound strength and resilience. She had been through the fire, and though she had been scarred, she had come out the other side stronger than ever. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still days when the weight of everything threatened to overwhelm her. But Glory had learned an important lesson, that she was worthy of love, respect, and happiness. And no matter what life threw her way, she would never again settle for anything less. Kindly share your opinion about what you feel in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share.